Okay, good morning, people. I'll check the live chat here. So, Min, good morning, Min. Min's okay. She seems pretty happy. Ella's pretty good. Lily is just barely awake, it looks like, and yawning quite a bit. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Karen. Casey looks cool with her sunglasses on. Oh, Michael's brokenhearted. Sorry. Should should we ask? Maybe not. I don't know. Sorry to hear that. Karen looks happy. Good morning again, Karen. Mashid looks pretty happy. Good morning, Mashid. Manish is here. Hi, Manish. Hi, Luan. Good morning, Jenna. Good morning, Adalbert. Oh, just joking. Okay. Oh, he's trolling us. Pearly, good morning. Thika, good morning to you. Okay, so here we are, Thursday, right? I will remind you right now, and I'll probably remind you at the end of class as well. Don't forget our little micro papers due on tomorrow. It's due tomorrow. I'm looking forward to marking it on the weekend, so make sure you submit it to me tomorrow. You can email it to me, or you can put it in a Microsoft Teams message. Either one. Email is probably easier, but I'm flexible. Okay, so what we'll do today is talk a little bit about India. Yesterday and a little bit of the day before, I think, we talked about how how civilization in this part of the world gets going. And it's kind of an interesting story, actually. Good morning, Carmen. It's kind of an interesting story, actually. And if you recall, what we talked about was, I'm just going to skip over that. Yeah, we're in this part of the world. We've seen these maps. What we were talking about yesterday and the day before was the Indus River Valley culture. And so we said that around 5,000 years ago or so, we have a civilized culture appearing in that part of the world. And by civilized, we mean people living in cities, people practicing intensive agriculture, people writing things down, people building very massive structures. We have all of those things going on in this part of the world 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Good morning, Eliana. And so, even though we have a lot of archaeological remains from this civilization, it turns out we don't know too much about them because even though they have a writing system, we don't know how to read it. And so we're not exactly sure who these people are or what language they spoke or what they thought or felt or believed, right? We don't know much about their religious life either, of course, because most religious things are based on belief, right? They're based on stories and feelings and understandings, and we can't really read any of those things from this civilization, so we're not really sure what was going on. Really, the only thing we know is that the civilization kind of appeared around 4,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, and then eventually it kind of disappeared. And again, we're not really sure about why that happened either. We do know that these new people show up in the region from the northwest that we're calling the Aryans or the Indo-Aryans. They kind of appear in the area around the same time as this civilization starts to disappear. Maybe they have something to do with that, maybe they don't. Some people have said that the Indus River Valley civilization sort of mismanaged the flooding, or the flooding of the river became unpredictable, and so that caused the collapse of their civilization as well. We watched a bit of a video yesterday that suggested climate change might have been involved, and it's possible, of course, that all of these things were involved, right? So we're not really sure what happened, but again, around 18 or 1700 BC, so a little less than 4,000 years ago, it seems that people were living in this very centralized way and farming and trading and interacting. And then it seems that people sort of abandoned the cities and went off to live in other places and live a more decentralized kind of life. Good morning, Ying. So this new people that come in are who we called the Aryans or the Indo-Aryans or the Vedic Aryans. And so there's a few different names for these people. Again, we know that they come in from the north and west, maybe from kind of Afghanistan or Pakistan kind of area, west of Pakistan. We see that in the third point here, the third bullet, these people are not urban. They don't live in cities. They move around quite a bit. And so they do some farming, but they seem to be herding animals like cows. And so when you think about it, that's kind of interesting, right? Because we have this Indus River civilization that they live in cities, and we have all of this kind of architecture and sort of ruined cities left over to tell us about them. But we can't really read their writing, so we don't know anything about them in that way. But with the Aryans are different. The Aryans don't really build any cities, and so we don't have that type of information, but it turns out that eventually they do write something down. So they have their prayers preserved in Vedas, and the Rig Veda is the most kind of important one. They pass these Vedas down orally, so they memorize them, but eventually they get written down. And so we know the Indus River Valley civilization from their archaeology, but not from their writing. And with these early Aryan people, we don't know them from their archaeology because there isn't a lot there, but we do know them from their writing. So they're kind of opposite in the types of evidence we have for these two groups. But it seems that the people that were living in India prior to the arrival of the Aryans, and then the arrival of the Aryans themselves, are sort of the foundation for for Indian civilization. I'm going to sneeze here in a second, or maybe not. Yeah, so this is kind of the founding of Indian cultural civilization as we know it. This is kind of the beginning. And so again, we said these Vedas were sort of religious knowledge and religious prayer, and they were passed down orally. People memorized them and recited them really for thousands of years. And again, these Vedas go very far back in history, and to some degree it's difficult to know exactly how far back they go because we can't really date them. Again, they're not written, they are memorized, and so they go very far back into history. But by looking at them carefully, we can learn some things about the culture and religion of the culture and religion of these Aryan people. And so I asked you some questions from the textbook yesterday. I asked you to read, and then we went over them. And I think what we saw, or what we read, was that the Indo-Aryans were migrants, and they arrived in the Indian subcontinent from the west, from Afghanistan or from Pakistan. And as we'll talk about today, they actually might have arrived from a lot further away from that. They settle in northwestern India, in what's now the Punjab, but they begin to sort of expand to the south and to the east as time goes on. And again, this is kind of the founding of Indian culture and religion and civilization here, with this kind of mix of indigenous Indians, so Indians who were living in India prior, and then the arrival of these Aryan people that kind of mix together. We said that these Vedic hymns told us a few things about the Indo-Aryans. In the prayers, they were asking the gods to bless them with cattle, so cattle are obviously important to them. Bountiful harvests, so they obviously do some farming. With rain, with friends and wealth and fame and sons, right? So we kind of know if you're asking the gods to bless you with all of these things, you kind of know that these things are important to this civilization, right? We said that these people did some farming, but they were mostly herding animals, and probably cows, right? Cows are very prized for these people. But we do see some evidence of agriculture as well. We learned a little bit about the family and social structure of these Indo-Aryans, and so they probably lived in extended families of 3 generations or so, which actually wouldn't have been very strange for this period of history. Probably lots of people lived in that way. We had fathers as the patriarchal heads of the family. I said that patriarchal was kind of the situation where men are in power. We said that sons were in charge of caring for these herds of cattle and sort of winning honor in battle for the family, while the father kind of managed the family and served as kind of the head of the family. And we saw that men were kind of the dominant gender in this society, but women were didn't have quite as much power, but still had more than they would later have. So there was some inequality, but the inequality will increase for women as time goes on. We said that the Rig Veda also told us a little bit about the religion of these people. And so we said that they were polytheistic, that they had lots of different gods because they mention different gods in their prayers. We said that the universe was composed of the sky and the earth and the netherworld or the underworld, which again is quite common in many religions. We saw that there were many different divinities and demons that were responsible for good things and bad things happening in society, and that and that Indra, the god of war and the god of storm, was kind of the most important, or the god that most people like to pray to. And that brought us to that documentary that we watched yesterday too. And so in the documentary, we saw, I think, a few interesting things. We saw that the narrator was explaining that India preserves kind of an unbroken thread of human history. And so based on genetic tests, we can identify that some of the people that are still living in sort of southern central India today are part of this haplogroup type here, CM130. And so these may have been part of the initial migration of people that evolved in Africa and then left Africa, settled in India, and then basically stayed there and continued to live their lives. Lots of other people, lots of other groups get kind of pushed around into different parts of the world, or they migrate out. But there seems to be a population of people that left Africa, settled in the Indian subcontinent, and then basically never left. They just continued to live there. And so the narrator pointed out that there's a continuity from that first migration of people tens of thousands of years ago all the way to today, which is amazing, right? It's remarkable. Yeah. We saw a ritual in which Brahmins were doing some chants and mantras, and they were teaching these mantras to young Brahmins. And the narrator was expressing the fact that these are quite significant because some of the sections of these mantras, some pieces of them, are in no known language. And so they are actually the language they were originally in has actually disappeared and died out. And so some of the things that have been passed down from generation to generation are very, very ancient. And some of these mantras don't even follow the structure of any modern language either. And some of them seem similar to bird songs. And so the narrator was kind of speculating that, actually how old are these chants? And they may go back, they certainly go back thousands of years, but how many thousands of years old are they? So it's really interesting to think about the fact that people are still teaching these chants and these mantras and these sort of spoken words, but they're so ancient. It's amazing. We also saw in the video yesterday that, or it was mentioned anyway, that many European scholars didn't believe that a major civilization could occur in this part of the world. And so European scientists at the time were very ethnocentric and a little bit racist. And so they traced civilization from themselves because they thought they were the greatest civilization ever. They traced their origins back to Greece and to Rome and a little bit to Egypt and the Near East. And so that was where they felt that civilization and culture came from. It came from that part of the world. And so when they looked at India, they thought, oh no, India is so backwards and primitive. Of course, civilization wouldn't come from there. But as it turns out, it does. And as it actually turns out, that civilization in the Indus River Valley might have actually been older than the ones in Mesopotamia and Egypt that we've already talked about. So a little bit of that's okay, Lim. I'm glad you're here. So a little bit of racism or a little bit of ethnocentrism there on the part of these earlier researchers. Um, and again, we said that the Indus River Valley civilization might have ended due to climate change, and so we we were listening to in the video we were listening to a climate scientist who suggests that the timing or the intensity of the monsoon might have changed. And again, if you're if the rains don't come and the river doesn't flood, you can't water your crops, and so people start to starve or not be able to grow enough food, and then they have to leave, they have to move. And so the scientists that we heard from yesterday suggest that that might have been the case, and people may have moved off to the east and to the south, and then maybe that left some space for those Vedic Aryans to come in from the northwest and settle and eventually kind of mix into a larger Indian culture. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I actually would like to watch a little more of that documentary because honestly, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's doing a good job of presenting some important aspects of Indian cultural history to us. Okay, and so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to watch a little more of this documentary, maybe another 20 minutes or so, and I will post the questions I want you to answer and the sort of amount of the video I want you to watch. I'll post those in Microsoft Teams, and then we'll take some time to watch it. Okay, so let me just have a look here. So there's about 20 minutes. Okay, so I'll put the questions and the amount of time you're supposed to watch the documentary. I'll put those in Microsoft Teams. I'll give you about 25 minutes or so to watch the video and answer the questions. Then we'll take a 10-minute break because we'll be about there anyway. And then we'll meet back here. So that'll be at about 11 o'clock, okay? So go to Microsoft Teams. You'll see the video link and the questions there. And watch the video, do the questions, take a little break, and then we'll come back here at 11 o'clock and we'll be ready to answer some of those questions. So make sure you type out what you can, type what you can get from this video, and then we'll discuss it, okay? Don't forget to type them out. All right, I'll see you in just a little bit, okay? Okay, people, and we're back. So, um, man, this stuff is super interesting. So, this section of the documentary is all about language and what we can learn from it, right? And so we read a little bit of it in the text about some of the things that we've learned from the Vedas, but in the video we just saw, we see we see it sort of played out a little more clearly, I think. Sorry, I think I got some allergies today, so I'm a little sniffy. Sorry about that. Um, so in the video, the first question I asked you was this one. I said, William Jones, who's a British scientist, what does he discover after being taught Sanskrit by some of these Brahmin priests? And so Cindy says, yeah, he rewrites history of the language. How does he do that? Yeah, he discovers that Sanskrit is similar to Greek and Latin, right? Which is, on the surface, when you think of it, is quite bizarre, right? Because these are two very different languages to look at them. They are from cultures that are separated by thousands of miles, and they're even, yeah, there seems to be no obvious connection between them, right? Yeah, he noticed a close similarity between Latin and Greek, yeah, and English and other languages as well. Yeah, you're all very right. And so, how does how does he do this? How does he notice these similarities? And that was my second question. What exactly was he noticing? What similarities was he noticing? Cindy says gives lecture to society. Okay, he probably did, right? Based on his findings, he probably gave lectures to sort of say, look what I discovered. Yeah, that's definitely true. Maybe let's see what you said. I'm not sure if this was a good question or not, but we'll see. We'll see in a second here. Okay, sorry, I am sniffy. Uh, yeah, so Karen says he compared texts. Yeah, exactly. And more specifically, he compared words in Greek and Latin and English. And this is what linguistic anthropologists and linguists and philologers sometimes do, is they compare words within different languages to see how similar they are. And the more similar they are, the more related the languages are. And so this is what William Jones did. And so, for instance, if you if you look at the word for brother in Sanskrit, that word is sorry, I'm probably not going to pronounce it correctly, but it's bratar. Bratar is the Sanskrit word for brother. But if you look in Latin, it's frater. If you look in Greek, frater. If you look in French, frère. English, brother. Saxon, brother. German, bruder. Dutch, broder. Old Slavic, bratu. Old Irish, brather. Those words are all very, very similar. It's similar words for brother. And the thing is, it's not an accident, right? It's not, oh, what a coincidence, these words are similar. The idea is that they have, well, that's actually the question I asked you, so maybe I'll just ask you instead of, no, actually, I didn't ask you that. So the fact that those words are similar is not a coincidence. It means that those languages have a common ancestor, right? So there was one language, people kind of split up and moved into different areas, and then the people who split up, those languages started to evolve and change a little bit on their own. But lots of those words don't change very much from year to year, generation to generation, especially the much more basic words, right? So mother, father, brother, sister, house, river, mountain, sky, earth. All of those are kind of very basic words, very central words, and they're words that don't change very much, right? You don't change what you call your father from generation to generation, right? That's a very traditional word. And so those words tend not to change very much. And so if you look at all of these languages that are children of this earlier parent language, you see that they all have very similar words. And so that's what William Jones sees. He sees that very unexpectedly, Sanskrit, whose writing looks very different from the Greek and Latin writing that people might be used to, there's a lot of similarities between how those languages work and what the words are, right? So that's pretty remarkable. That's a pretty remarkable discovery. We'll come back to that in just a little bit, okay? Another question I asked you was, what do we learn about Aryans from these early written sources? And again, we've talked about some of those things from the textbook, but a few more things come to light here in the video. Yeah, we find out, Cindy says we find out that the name of the Aryans, the word that they call themselves, has to do with civilized, right? They see themselves as the civilized ones, the socialized ones, right? So that's where that word comes from. Aryan is to be civilized, and that's how they saw themselves. What else do we learn? What else do we learn from those early sources? Yeah, they had a special drink, right? That's very true. We learn about we learn a few things about their religion. Noisy. Sorry. We learn things about their religion. We hear things about Indra, the god of the sky and of the rain. What else do we learn about from these? What else do we learn about from these very early written sources? What else do we learn about? KC says that around 1500 BC, yeah, these tribes begin to enter India with new languages and new gods. Yeah, how do we know that? How do we know, based on those religious texts, how do we know where these people are? Yeah, they migrated south. How do we know that, though, from the religious texts? I'm curious. How do we know where they are? How do we know where they are? Well, if you recall in the video, okay, so yeah, in the prayer they said something about creating a path as they move. So they were talking about the fire god creating paths for them, right? Yeah, that's part of it, right? So we know that we know these people were migrating, they were on the move, and they were moving in a way that they associated with the fire god. We know that. But if you remember, they also said that they mentioned specific rivers, right? They mentioned specific rivers and landmarks that they cross. And so that helps us to know where they were coming from and where they were, right? So they actually mention geographic places on the map. So yeah, that's very true. So because they reference certain places that we know where they are, we know where these kind of Aryans were moving, right? So we know a little bit about their religion, we know a little bit about what was valuable to them, and we actually have a bit of a record of the way in which they came, because some of those place names found their way into the Vedas, right? So that brings us to soma. So what's soma and what's it used for? What is soma and what's it used for? The narrator there, whatever that guy's name is, I should find out his name. He spends some time in an Afghan bazaar looking for this stuff. And so Cindy says it's a drink that has a bitter taste. Yes. What else do we know about it? What it is and what its use is. It's a drink used for socializing and for healing. Okay, very good. What else do we know about it? What else do we know? We know that. Okay, so it's a drink that it tastes bitter. It's for socializing or for healing. Casey says that it is. It's a sacred drink. Yeah, that the Aryans use. Oh yeah, and it enlightens your senses. Yeah, so it has. It seems to have. It has ephedrine in it, which is a stimulant, and so it works in probably a similar way to coffee or to caffeine. It's one that it's a yeah. So they might have offered it during sacrifices. So they might have had it during rituals, but it's a stimulant drink, and so it sort of wakes up your senses and sharpens them, and so people who like their caffeine buzz in the morning, this plant gives you, I think, a similar feeling. And interestingly, the narrator says that it's a plant that doesn't grow in India, right? It comes from outside of India, from Afghanistan and from Central Asia. And so it's not it's not something that's part of the Indian tradition. It's something that the Aryans bring with them, right? Which is interesting too. Okay, so then the narrator takes us to Turkmenistan, of all places, but he takes us there to an excavation of an ancient city in Turkmenistan. And it's a city that has, of course, connections to the Aryans, connections to the Zoroastrians and the Iranians later on, but the archaeologist says that the site was abandoned about 4,000 years ago. And so people left the city and stopped living there. And why did they stop doing that? Why did they stop living in the city? Why did they abandon this city and stop living there? No? No? Okay. If you remember, the archaeologist said that the river had actually moved, right? And so, again, we have a change in climate responsible for moving people around. That's okay. It's okay not to know. Yeah, so the archaeologist says that the river shifted its course. It moved away from where the city was. And of course, as we all know, people rely on these rivers to water their crops. If the river changes course and it moves, people can't water their fields anymore and they can't live there. And so this city was created, people were living there, and then as climates and environments change, it's no longer a suitable place and people have to move off. And this might be a tricky question too, but I'll ask you anyway because that's It's my job to ask you tricky questions. That's what they pay me for. Why is this site kind of important? Why is it interesting? Why was the narrator at that site in the first place? Why was he there in the first place? This might be a tough one, but it actually might be easier than you think as well. But we'll never know unless you type something into the live chat. Just saying. Okay. Karen says, yeah, so its remains are linked to the Aryans who move into India, yes, and to other civilizations. So yeah, this archaeological site is connected to a lot of other cultural groups that come later, right? So that's definitely important. There might be one extra little piece of that. I think, Karen, you've got most of it, but I think there's just maybe just a little bit more too. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. What was his name again? Zarini? No. Victor. Oh yeah. Sarianidi was his name. Yes, he's an archaeologist. The only other thing I think we're missing there is, Karen, you're right. It's a site that is connected to other cultures that will come later, but it also may have been a place through which the Aryans passed through on their way to India, right? So this is a place that these people originally came from, and so. Yeah, part of what this section of the film was talking about was kind of a linguistic approach or a linguistic anthropological approach. So looking at how language functions and how it's transmitted. And so what they're kind of talking about here, and yeah, like a pit stop, exactly. So what they're talking about here is this Indo-European language group. And so based on similarities between languages, linguists imagine that there was one group of people who were living in this part of the world. So you can see the green dot there is the posited homeland. So the homeland we think these people lived in. And whoever these people were living in this part of the world, kind of just to the east of modern Turkey and sort of to the north of modern Iraq, whoever these people were spoke some language, which we call Indo-European. And as people moved out of that part of the world and spread into other parts of Europe and Asia and the Indian subcontinent, as they moved, they took their language with them, that Indo-European language, but over time those languages started to evolve and change a little bit too. And so these people here in green, we don't really know who they were, and we don't really know the language that they spoke because there's no record of that language, but we can tell that it existed because of all of the children languages that have come from that parent language. And so you might remember this slide from one of our very early classes where we said that all of these languages are actually related. And so you can see down toward the bottom in the Indic branch, you can see that Sanskrit is a language that comes from Indo-European, right? It's Indo-European is a language that's like the great-grandparent of all of these languages. And so Sanskrit is a child language of Indo-European, whatever language that really was. And then Sanskrit has had children languages of its own. And all of these languages that are now spoken in the Indian subcontinent are all related to Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is related to this Indo-European language, whatever that was like. And so yeah, and so there's been some interesting work done here with language families and how they're related. And again, that can help us trace where people have come from and which people used to be one people but have now separated out. And that's especially useful because in many parts of history in which these things happened, there's not a very extensive archaeological record. So it will be hard for us to really see this in terms of what's left behind in the ground, but we can see evidence that these people were once one people by the similarities in their language. And so the Sanskrit language and the things that are in the Rig Veda not only tell us things about what the Indo-Aryans were like, but it also tells us a little bit about where they came from, and it also tells us a little bit about what other peoples they might be related to, which again is super interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second. How are we doing? Do you have any questions, concerns, confusions, problems, issues, or how are we doing? Give me a bit of feedback. How are we? How are we? So Karen's good. I know you're good. Sarvesh is in Sanskrit. You mean so the name comes from Sanskrit? You're saying, Sarvesh? Cindy's good. Dika's good. Sam is good. Sheet is good. Okay, cool. Casey is good. Okay. Yeah, so that's super cool. So here we are. That's really cool, actually. Sarvish, thank you for saying that. Aliana's okay-ish. Okay, so here we have one of our people who has a name that is connected to that tradition, right? And so your name, Sarvish, is connected to Sanskrit, which is connected to these Aryans, which is connected to these people that, eventually, would have made their way into that part of the world, but initially come from a very different one and are connected to all sorts of other people too. I don't know what you think about that. I think that's super cool. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so I think what I'll do for today is I will leave it there. You do have a micro paper due for me tomorrow, so I think I'll leave you with the rest of the time today to maybe finish that up if you're not finished. I have one person's emailed to me already, so if you're that person, thank you very much. Other people, I'll let you take the rest of class to finish that up if you need it. Email it to me tomorrow, and tomorrow in class we will pick up more of India, and I think we'll talk about the caste system, the Varna and the caste system tomorrow as well, I believe. So that's what's coming up. But until then, I'll leave it there, and you can finish up working on your little paper if you haven't finished it yet. As always, if you have questions, you can team message me or email me. And yeah, other than that, I'll leave it there. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Finish your work. It's beautiful outside, so maybe try to get outside later today if you're able to, because that's good for your health. And I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so bye.